just being openly challenged about your views, period? That would be one thing. So this caught my attention about a week or so ago, when it first came up. Why an opinion piece in Politico here, and I think it merits something interesting because, as I've talked about before, I'm pretty concerned about viewpoint diversity in different science disciplines and what have you, and things that may be cropping up that would be a problem. And this is an interesting take on it, and I'm not sure how much I think on it here. It's just very strange to me. I would be very curious of your thoughts, and I think an interesting idea, not just with respect to public health, which is what this author is talking about, but also with respect to other fields. He wrote in Politico. This gentleman is Professor Harold Pollack, who researches urban public health challenges and is the Helen Ross, professor at University of Chicago's Crown Family School of Social Work, Policy, and Practice. Here, and he writes why public health experts aren't reaching conservatives on COVID. Professionally, they barely know any. So here's a radical proposal. My field needs affirmative action for conservatives starting now. First off, I'm going to say he's not just necessarily not reaching conservatives either. I know quite a number of liberals who are not thrilled right now and have a lack of trust in the professionals. And I said during the chat on with the whole group of public folks about that, there's a lot there that crosses the lines of not just being conservative and not being reached by public health officials. So it's important to bear that in mind, that, he's not entirely accurate with that statement, that he's not just reaching conservatives. There's an awful lot of people they're just not reaching because they're not listening. And that was the main thrust of what I got from, one of the main thrusts of what I got from that conversation, is that public health officials have seem to have stopped listening to the people they are supposed to serve, seem to also have stopped listening to, stop treating people as people and worthy of respect and listening to their concerns and complaints and what have you, but instead just going off on their merry way and saying, you have to do this, you have to do that. I haven't read through this article all the way full, so this might be a little bit of a reaction video at the same time, but I saw the top line thing of affirmative action for conservatives, and those of you who watch this channel know I am a conservative, so this ought to be an interesting reaction from me in here, but I also have another thing to pair with it, and part of the reason I'm pointing this out, well, let's just get into it. Let's see. As American public health officials wring their hands over how to reach resolutely unvaccinated people, one glaring disconnect has emerged. Politically speaking, the people spreading the message about the COVID vaccine don't look or sound much like the people who need to heed the message. Surveys show that Americans dug in against the vaccine skew decidedly conservative. And as a public health expert, I can attest that my colleagues, to put it mildly, do not. The palpable lack of conservative students, scholars, and thinkers within the main academic institutions that train our public health and social service workforce should be obvious to everyone in the field. I spent the past 3 decades in the worlds of public policy, public health, Politico, health I don't know what that is. Health and social work research. For understandable reasons, conservatives have always been scarce in our seminar rooms and hallways, probably more scarce today than any time I can remember. It is an especially immediate problem in 2021, but it has much deeper consequences than just the vaccination campaign. Consider some recent anecdotal examples I've witnessed recently. A colleague praised a student for convincingly espousing a conservative perspective in classroom discussion when the student himself obviously didn't hold the view. A second colleague noted in lecture with properly distanced intonation, "What would you say to a conservative who might respond?" The implicit resumption in both these conversations was clear and likely correct. No one was actually present who held these conservative views or really to know that they were being actually accurately captured at all. That is a very true statement. Let's see, the overall academic world has always leaned liberal, but even in that context, the political imbalance within social work and public health is striking. In a 2018 survey of public health scholars in the Society for Epidemiologic Research, 72.4% reported their politics as liberal or left-leaning, less than 5% responded conservative or right-leaning. A 2014 analysis of one social work program found that 9.4% of students identified as Republican, 55.9% identified as Democrats, and I guess the rest were somewhere in the middle. Interesting. In many fields, not just mine, conservative estrangement from our professional and academic communities damages discourse on both sides of the partisan divide. In public health particularly, it hurts the credibility and cultural competence we need to do our jobs across vast swaths of America. In our political conversation, it deepens moral and intellectual decline of American conservatism itself, a palpable decline exemplified and worsened by the Trump presidency. Okay. I'm going to stop here with this for a second. I applaud Professor Pollack for recognizing a problem. Academia does have a huge problem with not having enough conservative voices in positions as faculty and what have you, representing different viewpoints and actually getting to viewpoint diversity. They tend to, in the last few years, really, at least it feels that way to me, shut that down as being someone who is in academia myself. And a conservative in academia, no less. Here's the thing about this, though, is that he just there's no other way to say this, but then he just exactly revealed his own damn bias right here. And why I would have a very hard time wanting to talk to him. Because not knowing conservatives, he just made the statement here, it deepens the moral and intellectual decline of American conservatism. So, deepens the moral and intellectual decline. If you are shutting people away from conservatism, if you're scaring conservatives away and you yourself are growing more liberal, and that's a problem because then it deepens intellectual decline, decreases the intellectual curiosity, intellectual rigor, anything like that, then you would have to be honest and say that happens to both sides. If you get into the difference between, if you get into that thing where you're pushing people away, you're having estrangement, and that's leading to intellectual decline of American conservatism, yeah, actually, I would put it there that happens to both sides. And not just to the conservatives, to the liberals, to the left. If they cannot work across lines and they are completely estranging themselves, that affects both. That does not just affect American conservatism. I reject that statement out of hand because you are not keeping diverse views on both sides here. You're not having conservatives work with liberals, yes, and liberals are just having as much of the same problem in that you're getting estranged. You're getting estranged and you're having your own intellectual decline over there. Moral decline. I know an awful lot of conservatives who would very much disagree with you, and that again points to your bias. You are presuming that the other side is declining because you're not interacting with us. You're not interacting with us, and therefore you're presuming you're better. There's a remarkable amount of arrogance to me that comes off in that statement, and why I wouldn't want to work with you, because you are presuming that just because conservatives don't interact with you or you're not interacting with conservatives, well, that's why they're becoming morally nasty. Is because they're just not interacting with us, the righteous people. No. That does not follow logically. I'm sorry. You have to assume yourself superior, which is pretty nasty to do if you are attempting to bridge the divide. I recommend that you reconsider that, Professor. The partisan woke gap provides fodder for jokes on social media. The gap is real, though, and it's not funny. and it hurts conservative priorities as well as liberal ones. In that, I agree. It hurts our ability to work with each other, and I would just say American priorities. How about that? In early 2017, I attended a health policy dinner, with Democratic and Republican House members. In casual conversation, it was obvious the Democrats were connected with a cadre of health policy professionals and Republicans were not. Soon after, House Republicans passed a conspicuously shoddy bill to repeal and replace Obamacare, a bill that was supposedly the Congress's first priority under a Republican president. The bill had so many basic flaws, including a nearly $13,000 proposed increase in yearly health insurance premiums for low-income 64-year-olds, that is politically self-immolated once it faced real scrutiny. Yeah. Here's the thing with that. It didn't come out to be the way you wanted because they didn't interact with the experts. Here's the thing about that. You are supposed to, as a politician, you are supposed to be accountable to the people, not just to the experts. Point on that one is that they may have been doing that because that's what their constituents were asking for, not because that's what the experts wanted. The same estrangement enables palpable absolutism and lazy groupthink among progressives. Yeah. But I would also point out that what tends to happen amongst progressives is they don't like dissent, period. They don't tend to like it when any people dissent at all, and this is something I've struggled with recently with some of my more progressive colleagues, that, they don't like it if you have a different point of view and a different opinion. Many of our students do not have and may never have the experience of being openly challenged by conservative peers in our classrooms. Okay. How about just being openly challenged about your views, period? That would be one thing. You should be openly challenging them, period, regardless of whether it's a conservative or a liberal doing it, but I digress. I fear that many struggle to distinguish truly unworthy arguments presented by some conservatives, say prevarication about climate change or denying the Republican Party's long history of voter suppression and appeals to white racism. For more worthy and serious arguments presented by conservatives that everyone should learn from and address. I don't even know where to go with this. I honestly, right now, I don't know where to go with this. Someone here doesn't know the Republican Party that well, if that's what they're saying. To be honest, because you're buying into the progressive line right there. That's why people are going to it's one of the reasons why people are going to shut you off. Right there. Is one of the reasons, is that kind of nonsense. But, again, for decades, for instance, conservatives and libertarians argued that public employee unions wield excessive influence on state and local governments. It should not have taken the front page police misconduct cases, union opposition to evidence-based vaccine mandates, or my own state's seriously unfunded pension liabilities for progressives to see merits in these views. Yeah, and I agree with that. Actually, I am very glad to be in a right-to-work state, where I don't have to deal with being part of a union that doesn't represent me. I don't write these words as a conservative attacking supposed evils of cancel culture. I don't write as a conservative at all. I am an emphatic liberal Democrat. I figured that one out already. Over my career, I have witnessed many harms inflicted by conservatives' opposition to syringe exchanges and other essential public health efforts, most definitely including our current public health crisis. Angered by such memories, ensconced within a community of like-minded scholars, I might forget that liberal left communities are collections of imperfect humans like any other, with our own blind spots and biases arising from group conformity. Progressive academia often lacks sufficient voices in the room to call us on our errors. John Stuart Mill reminds us, those who know only their own side of the argument know little of that. Very true. Actually, I very much agree with that. You didn't need to put in here, if you were trying to get me over, get people on your side with this, I'm going to say you did not need to put in here this kind of stuff that you don't like. I don't think syringe exchanges are a good idea if you want to get people off of illegal drugs or anything like that and get them to improve upon their lives. That doesn't necessarily help somebody to provide a syringe exchange. That doesn't necessarily deal with harm there. But anyway, conservatives' fears about job discrimination strike me as understandable too. Imagine two job candidates, Martin and Michael. Martin finds the cultural norms among recent immigrants promote upward mobility, and the role of structural barriers to block that mobility is overstated. Challenging the consensus in his field, Michael conducts an analysis of equally high quality, but finds the opposite result. Or imagine Lynn and Laurie. They conduct essentially identical statistical analyses of mandatory minimum sentences for illegal gun possession in 43 jurisdictions. Lynn finds that mandatory minimums reduce gun crime by 4% and concludes such policies are valuable. Laurie finds that mandatory minimums have zero impact on gun crime and that such policies exemplify mass incarceration as a futile strategy to address structural causes of crime. Okay, so I'm going to point out this one thing here is if they're both doing the same study or both doing a very similar study with very similar methodologies and coming to completely different results, one of them did it wrong. Because that's not how science works. If it's supposed to be replicable and falsifiable, if you're doing the same thing with the same data in the same way over and over and over again, you should get the same result. If you're getting two different results and this, somebody did something wrong in the process there. So I'm going to point that out real quick in this. That's concerning. Anyway, yeah. I suspect that Michael and Laurie would have an easier job talk at many schools because they can come bearing findings more congenial to the liberal professors in the room. Martin and Lynn might have narrower margins for methodological judgment or cause or presentation stumbles. They would face the additional burden of addressing the potentially quite real danger that their findings would be used by political figures who do not wish minority communities well. I could also say quite the opposite, that with Michael and Laurie, their results could be used by figures who do not like certain minorities of communities either and do not like conservatives. So, we could flip that both ways. Danger that their findings will be used by political figures. If the issue were truly sensitive, say the efficacy of affirmative action, the comparative success of charter schools for minority and low-income students, or the unintended consequences of the ban-the-box policies barring employers from inquiring about criminal convictions, I'd be even more worried that some would face competitive disadvantage because of her views or her substantive feelings. I'm not sure who the heck you're referring to in this, but I'm not going to dwell on it. We should be open and intentional in addressing these concerns and in guarding against our own groupthink and biases. Yes, I actually agree with that, very much so, regardless if it's liberal or conservative. We should be very careful about that. We'll see if that actually gets there. I think you, Professor, in all fairness, I think you've made some unfair stereotypes of conservatives based upon your commentary here, just to begin with. So you might want to think about that before you go work with the conservatives next time. What can universities and other institutions do? Targeted student outreach would definitely be wise, particularly toward conservative rural communities where students might be very socially engaged, but might not be considering graduate study or PhD level research. As with other forms of outreach, this requires thoughtful, cultural competence engagement on the part of the universities hoping to broaden their student bodies. How about you just treat everybody like individuals? God seriousness, that's what I'm just looking for myself as a conservative. I want to be treated as a person, not as a member of a group. That's really what it is. I don't know how this is hard for some folks in academia some days. Speaking as one who works there myself. I've also come to support a radical policy with obvious ironies. We should practice affirmative action for religious, social, and economic conservatives in areas of academia where those holding these views are scarce. If someone applies to our school who it was, say, president of the University of Texas Students for Life, I want her in my classroom. I want progressive students to present, defend, refute, and to present, defend, refine, and improve their arguments, knowing that a peer who disagrees with them is right there, ready to engage. Of course, I want conservative students to have the same experience learning from their peers, ready to defend, refine, improve their own views. Target outreach to conservative groups, to communities and campuses where conservative views are common, would be useful tools to address this challenge. So would emission preferences to promote viewpoint diversity. Yes, there are plenty of awkward ironies here across the usual political lines. For a million reasons, conservatives may always be scarcer in public health and social work than in the corporate sector. Still, we can do better. Countless American conservatives honor, through their lives and service, values of compassion, self-sacrifice, and inclusion dear to liberals. They care exactly about the same issue. about exactly the same issues that draw people into public health and social service professions. So I applaud you for that. I thank you for that, Professor. That's a very appreciated statement. I cannot presume to speak for all conservatives, and I will not. I tend not to be a fan of affirmative action, and the Harvard case is a good example of why, because it tends to end up being discriminatory against minorities. And I don't necessarily want that. I just want to be able to get into something on my merit and succeed on the merit and just be treated as a normal person rather than as some member of a group and what have you. And I am not going to go toward the victimhood status for anything just because I'm a conservative. And I think that's incredibly wrong and not going to make anything better, really. So that's that. I don't necessarily agree. And I mean, it's an interesting idea to have a sort of affirmative action for students. But there's got to be a lot of cultural change in academia. So like the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology, I think they're right. Anyway, I'm trying to remember the exact name of the center. I apologize. But it was in March, and it was the study done by Eric Kaufman that pointed out that in academia, 70% of conservative academics and PhD students report working in a hostile work environment in the university. 60-some-odd% of conservative graduate students report being deterred from going to graduate school because of the attitude of discrimination at their university. A larger share of conservative academics retire early than liberal academics. Things like that are happening, and that is a serious problem. And it has nothing to do necessarily with affirmative action. These are students that are already there, students and professors that are already there that are unfortunately having lots of problems. So I think that is an issue to address first, to be honest, to go there, to change the culture somehow in a campus environment to make it a little bit more friendly to viewpoint diversity, because it sure as heck doesn't feel like it a lot lately. George W. Bush saved millions of lives in the world through the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, a program we might well emulate. In the vaccinated world against COVID, liberal students would be well served by appreciating the impact of the Christian conservatives who helped drive the effort. A conservative student in our programs would meet countless residents of Chicago's South Side who identify with the political left, who honor through their own lives and service values of entrepreneurship, faith-based service, and personal responsibility dear to conservative. We can learn from each other, honor and challenge each other across the partisan and ideological divides. To do this, we need both sides routinely present on our faculties and in our classrooms. That's not the reality right now, and we must fix that. I do very much agree with that sentiment at the end. I don't necessarily agree with the idea of adding a whole nother affirmative action group, because generally I'm not in favor of affirmative action because you're giving favor based upon immutable characteristics when affirmative action is concerned. I don't know that I necessarily want you to give favoritism to me because I'm conservative. I just quite simply want to be treated with respect and to be treated as an individual rather than be treated as a member of a group and presumed I think a certain way or think a certain way or act a certain way or what have you because of being a member of a particular group according to you. Yes, I say I have politically conservative views, but that is not to say that all conservatives think the same. That is not to say all conservatives think exactly the same as anyone. And yeah, I know that full well, seeing some conservatives who are behaving like idiots lately, in my view, alongside of others. So there's a lot more to that. And frankly, I'm actually registered as an independent because I'm pretty much politically homeless right now. So yeah, I don't necessarily agree because I don't want there to be that kind of discrimination to begin with. And I think it should be removed as a requirement. I do think you probably want to get to the point of making sure that we're enforcing rules that limit or eliminate the amount of bullying that happens on campus and discrimination that happens on campus because of that. I think the same study that I mentioned from the Center for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology, with Eric Kaufman's study, also pointed out that I think it was about a third, at least, of hiring of administrators at different universities did actually admit to discriminating against conservatives because of their beliefs as conservatives. Let's put it that way. And this was in hiring, funding, and promotions. Oh God, I think I might sneeze. Apologize if I do. But so there is that. So there's a lot of that has to change. And I don't know that affirmative action, just getting people in there just because they are conservative, is going to force that to change. And I'm not generally for it because I'm not a fan of affirmative action to begin with and discriminating based upon such things that don't necessarily matter. I'm also, as a scientist, dedicated to the idea of universalism, that you shouldn't be judging somebody's work based upon political affiliation or titles or race or gender, any of that. You shouldn't be judging based upon that, period. So you and I would disagree. And as I said, Professor Pollack, I really do think, I thank you for writing this, because I'm glad you recognize the problem there, and it is a problem. But you also need to realize that you did really show some of your own biases in here, that thinking, conservatives are the only one in moral decline and things like that. But that cuts both ways if you're talking about estrangement. That does not just cut for conservatives, that cuts for liberals and progressives too, which you partly said with progressives, but you spent more of your time talking about how conservatives are causing problems and conservatives are harming things by their actions just because they don't interact with you, the liberal, who I think by your writing here seems to think that you are morally superior, which I find that dubious to begin with. But I know you were writing actually specific for public health, but I actually do very much appreciate this, because this problem that he's talking about is not just a problem in public health. I'm a climate scientist for a living, and I believe the number is, right now, it is 27-1 liberals to conservatives in geosciences, which is where climate science falls under. So, yeah, there's a heck of a lot of bias, and I'm a conservative and a climate scientist. Hey, I'm probably one of your weird unicorns right now. But anyway, there's that. But I also want to point out that it's going to take a lot to get that culture changed. And, it starts with you all in here. So I wanted to come to this to finish it off. This is from EOS, which is the magazine blog of the American Geophysical Union. And this was a piece written in 2019. Does our vision of diversity include social conservatives? Achieving our goals of advancing science and benefiting society depends on ideological diversity. Cultivating relationships and dialogue with ideological opponents creates compassion and progress. So it is certainly interesting. And the authors here, I give a lot of credit to the authors for putting this together. I don't think given the way AGU has gone, I do not think this would be so popular right now, and I think from the comments down below it's not popular. Wasn't necessarily popular at the time. But they talk about it. It does require that. Heterodox Academy says something very similar, that you should be intellectually humble here and have humility to admit that. And so I think it's good there. This is a good piece. And he gets into this, he gets into a lot of these things. I'm not going to read through this now because this video is already running a little long. But I wanted to point something out here. He's very much about making sure that, and I believe this quote is exactly correct, a lack of ideologically diversity not only hurts those who are excluded, it decreases opportunity to improve arguments and examine blind spots in the majority. And that is very true in here too. So ideological diversity, yeah. But I want to go down here to make a point because of the... Oh, I forgot this was here. Anyway, I want to go down to the comments because the comments examines the the comments really, and some of these comments here actually points to the problem that I think you're going to have, Mr. Professor Pollack, with your own desire. And I think it's a good desire. Don't get me wrong. It's a very good desire. I would love to see more of it. And my fear with my own field is we're moving in an ideological groupthink kind of way where we're going to end up destroying our own fields because you're not willing to examine things and it becomes more religiosity rather than actual scientific inquiry. Because you need diverse viewpoints for good scientific inquiry, and diverse viewpoints doesn't just come from being different race, sex, gender, what have you. You should not presume that they have somebody with different races. You should not presume that somebody of a particular group has all the same thoughts and experiences and perspectives is something that's very, very shallow way of looking at it. But there was one in particular. Yeah, here we go. The simple answer to this is no. Our vision of diversity should not include social conservative if what we mean by social conservative are institutions that practice active exclusionary policies to other human beings. Social conservative should not be used as a cover for groups that are racist, bigoted, and otherwise anti-exclusionary. Many people identify themselves as living conservative lifestyles and holding conservative beliefs, but do not practice nor believe in exclusionary practices. We give bigots power when we give them a cover of being socially conservative. At the same time, this article, by using this cover, undermines the big tent that academics have been genuinely inclusive of several conservative groups. So this article is all sorts of wrong. It's quite possible, and I'd rather not say, rather easy, I say, to embrace conservatives but not bigots, to embrace Muslims but not jihadists, to embrace Indians but not the caste system, to embrace LDS researchers but not embrace BYU as an institution, to embrace the dignity of people while not having to tolerate or be exclusionary of views and practices. So this is the point that I want to make, is there is actually a lot of commentary like this, and Professor Pollack may have actually gotten that himself. And this is an older article from AGU, but my concern right now with what's happened is how many people believe stereotypes about each other because of what they believe. Do you know what I mean? You've created whole new stereotypes associated with political affiliation. And can you get that out of a culture and get people to stop discriminating that way, even with affirmative action? I don't know that that's possible right now. And it's a concern to me because, you know, as I said, 27-1, I'm very outnumbered when I go into work, and I know it. That said, I applaud him for coming. And, you know, I say to you, Professor Pollack, I applaud you for putting this out there, for saying what you're thinking with this. I don't like the idea of affirmative action, to be perfectly honest, because I'm not a big fan of discriminating based upon anything. It should be based upon merit is my goal there. Based upon merit and, you know, written statements and things like that is what I want for applications to school. And that's kind of my thing with that generally. And I'm not going to presume to speak for all the other conservatives, because I don't believe that necessarily all conservatives do believe exactly the same things. But I do encourage, I find this very encouraging overall that, you know, you're actually thinking about it. But I do think you also need to check some of your own biases in here, because you made a lot of statements that I don't think a lot of conservatives would agree with, though I don't know them all myself. Definitely some statements in here that I don't agree with here with regards to how you've characterized conservatives. But that's it. I think overall a good article. What do you think? Because this is an issue with sciences right now, is that, you know, 27-1 with geosciences. Obviously, he's pointed out there's a huge amount with public health, huge disparity with public health in terms of conservative versus liberal. And that viewpoint diversity is important to science just generally. So I'd be curious of what you all think watching. Do you think there should be some kind of affirmative action based upon viewpoint? That's it for now. I look forward to your comments. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please just dip that like button into a chemistry beaker and smash it to bits. Share this video, subscribe to the channel, comment below. You can also find me at sciworthy.locals.com. If you become a supporter there, you can interact with me and other scientists. I'm not the owner of sciworthy.locals.com. I'm just a contributing supporter, and it's one of the places I like to hang out on the internet. So I will see you all next time. Till next time, I'm Adrian signing off. Stay curious, my friends.